Hello, you are watching video lecture number 22, the Constitution of 1787. We have three sections today. First, we're going to look at the rise of a nationalist faction, then the Philadelphia Convention, and then finally, the people debate ratification. So, despite its success in dealing with the issues arising from Western lands, the weak Confederate government was hamstrung by the states' continuing insistence on retaining their own sovereignty. Moreover, the turmoil within the states, illustrated not only by Shays' Rebellion, but also by attempts to use state governments in the interests of debtors against creditors, increasingly convinced many analysts that the states themselves were unable to preserve either domestic order or the rights of property. A number of revolutionary political leaders were convinced that something needed to be done, both to bolster the power of the Confederation and to rein in the more radical elements in the states. At Virginia's invitation then, 9 states agreed to meet in Annapolis, Maryland in September of 1786. However, only 5 states were formally represented when the convention began. And rather than continuing with their business, the delegates issued a call for a new convention to meet in Philadelphia in May of 1787. James Madison, who was disappointed by the failure of the Annapolis Convention, proceeded to consider what needed to be done to save this new federal union. The 1787 meeting to discuss revisions to the Articles of Confederation instead produced an entirely new constitution. The proposed new national charter was immediately controversial. Many people feared that imposing a powerful federal government on top of the existing state governments would likely result in a new tyranny, something like that of the British. The conventional wisdom of the 18th century stipulated that republics had to be small in order to be durable. And the opponents of the proposed Constitution frequently noted that the United States was simply too large to form a single republic. In response, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay wrote a series of essays known as the Federalist. In the Federalist number 10, Madison argued that the very size of the new federal government would protect the people from the tyranny of special interests. In the Federalist number 54, Madison tackled another potentially explosive issue, the notion of slavery and the 3/5 clause of the Constitution. Clearly, sectional interests were becoming more pronounced despite the compromises reached at the Federal Convention in 1787. So let's take a closer look at this convention with our first section, the rise of a nationalist faction. Money questions dominated the post-war agenda, and officials looked at them from a national rather than a state perspective, and became advocates of a stronger central government. Without tariff revenues, Congress could not pay the interest on foreign debt, but key commercial states in the North and most planters in the South opposed the idea of a national tariff. In 1786, the Virginia legislature met to discuss tariff and taxation policies, and they called for a convention in Philadelphia and a revision to the Articles of Confederation. Okay, so let's take a closer look at our next section, the Philadelphia Convention. In May of 1787, delegates from every state except Rhode Island arrived in Philadelphia. Most were moneyed men who supported creditors' property rights and a central government. George Washington was elected as presiding officer, and to forestall popular opposition, decided to deliberate in secret. The delegates exceeded their mandate to simply just revise the Articles of Confederation, and they considered James Madison's Virginia plan for national government. Madison's plan favored national authority, called for a national republic that drew its authority from all the people and also had direct power over them. And he created a 3-tiered national government in which the people would elect only the lower house of the legislature. The plan had two flaws. Citizens would oppose the national government's vetoing of state laws, and small states would object because they would have less influence than larger states. Delegates from the small states preferred another plan, which was called the New Jersey Plan, which strengthened the Confederation by giving it the power to raise revenue, control commerce, and make binding requisitions on the states, but preserved the states' control over their laws and guaranteed their equality. The Virginia Plan was passed by a bare majority, but the final plan had to be acceptable to existing political interests and social groups. So a great compromise was accepted, wherein the Senate would seat 2 members from each state, while seats in the House would be appointed on the basis of population. The convention vested the judicial powers of the United States in one Supreme Court, and left the national legislature to decide whether or not to establish lower courts. The convention placed the selection of the President of the United States in an electoral college, which was chosen on a state-by-state basis. So the President is not popularly elected. Congress was denied the power to regulate slavery for 20 years. To protect the property of Southern slave owners and the notion of free markets, delegates agreed to the Fugitive Clause that allowed masters to reclaim enslaved blacks or white indentured servants who took refuge in other states. To mollify anti-slavery sentiment in the northern states, the delegates did not give slavery national legal recognition by explicitly mentioning it in the Constitution, which spoke instead of citizens and, quote, all other persons. The Constitution was to be the supreme law of the land, and the national government was given power over taxation, military defense, external commerce, and the making of laws. The Constitution, which was signed on September 17th of 1787, mandated that the United States honor the national debt and restricted the ability of state governments to assist debtors. So now we have to move to ratification, and this brings us to our last section. The Constitution would go into effect upon ratification by special conventions in at least 9 of the 13 states. Nationalists began calling themselves Federalists and launched a political campaign supporting the proposed Constitution through things like pamphlets and newspaper articles. On the other side, anti-federalists opposed the Constitution. They feared that losing their power at the state level, they also pointed out that the document lacked a declaration of individual rights. Well-educated Americans with a traditional Republican outlook wanted the nation to remain a collection of small sovereign republics that were tied together only for trade and defense. The Federalists then pointed out that national authority would be divided among a president, a bicameral legislature, and a judiciary, and that each branch would check and balance the other. The Federalists promised to amend the Constitution with a National Bill of Rights in order to satisfy the Anti-Federalists. So this does conclude video lecture number 22, our brief look at the drafting of the Constitution. We looked at the rise of the nationalist idea, looking for a stronger central government, stronger than what the Articles of Confederation provided. We had a brief look at the Philadelphia Convention, and we looked at the different points between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan, and also the Great Compromise. And then finally, the ratification of the Constitution. So go ahead and answer the review questions that are on the screen now and continue on with your study.